The Galactic Enrollment Bureau. Actually, no. Let me start with something more important. Let me tell you about the single worst day of my professional career. And I have had some truly spectacular bad days. I once watched a Velgari recruit bite through a reinforced steel door during an anxiety episode. I once had to file paperwork because a Cathari cadet accidentally set the entire Eastern training wing on fire with her stress glands. I have, on 3 separate occasions, physically restrained beings that weighed more than a cargo freighter, using nothing but my voice and sheer personal stubbornness. I am Vorak, Senior Combat Instructor, Predator Academy, Outpost Drevok. I have trained warriors from 6 species across 4 star systems. I have never, in 41 years of service, been surprised. And then Dario Voss walked through my gate. The Galactic Enrollment Bureau, for those fortunate enough to have never dealt with them, is a bureaucratic organism that operates somewhere between catastrophic incompetence and weaponized indifference. They process intake forms for every military branch in the Galactic Coalition. Hundreds of thousands of forms, every cycle. They are very proud of their processing speed. They are considerably less proud of their accuracy rate, which, if we are being honest, is the kind of number you look at and then quietly look away from. Somewhere, in some brightly lit office that smells of recycled air and broken dreams, a clerk named Nobody, who will ever face consequences, looked at a form that read Dario Voss, Human, Earth Colony 7, Civilian Registration Pending, and processed it as Warrior Candidate, Priority Track, Combat Specialization. They sent him to me. My gate attendant, a young Keth male named Brickhall, came to my office at 0600 with the look of someone who had seen something they could not unsee. Instructor Vorak, Brickhall said, very carefully, there is a creature at the gate. A creature, I repeated. It came on the civilian transit shuttle. The civilian transit shuttle does not stop at Predator Academy. It does now, Brickhall said. Apparently the creature gave the pilot directions. I walked to the gate. I have walked to that gate 10,000 times. I have stood at that gate and watched warriors from the most violent species in the known galaxy flinch when they saw what waited for them inside. I stood at that gate and looked at Dario Voss, and for the first time in 41 years, I had no immediate response. He was small. Objectively, terrifyingly small. 2 arms, 2 legs, no claws worth mentioning, no visible armored plating, no threat display glands. He had a bag over one shoulder, and in his hand, he held a small paper container from which he was drinking something hot. He looked at the academy, then at me, then back at the academy, then he smiled, wide, easy, like a being who had never in his entire life been told there was something in the universe worth being afraid of. Hey, Dario Voss said. This the warrior place? Behind me, I heard Brickhall make a sound I can only describe as quiet, existential panic. I should have sent him back. I know that now. The correct response was to check his paperwork, identify the error, contact the bureau, and arrange return transport. This would have taken approximately 2 hours and saved everyone a significant amount of psychological damage. Instead, I looked at his enrollment form, saw that it was technically valid, stamped and coded and officially processed, and I did what any 41-year veteran does when faced with a problem they do not immediately know how to solve. I let it proceed and told myself it would work itself out. It did not work itself out. Orientation at Predator Academy follows a structure that has not changed in 80 years. This is because it works. The first gathering of recruits is intentional, choreographed chaos. Every species arrives carrying their instincts with them, sharp and unprocessed. And the first thing we do is let those instincts loose in a controlled environment. You learn a great deal about a warrior by watching what they do when nobody has told them the rules yet. The Velgari recruits arrived first, 3 of them, each one approximately twice the height of a standard door frame, with the particular kind of muscle density that suggests their home planet had a higher gravity and a very poor attitude. They entered the orientation hall and immediately began a territorial circuit, marking the room perimeter with scent glands. Standard Velgari behavior. Completely expected. The Cathari came next. Zorva was her name, and she was, by Cathari standards, considered relatively calm. By any other standard, she was a 6-foot predator with iridescent threat markings along her neck that pulsed when she was irritated. She looked at the Velgari and made a sound low in her chest that said, clearly, without words, "I have tolerated your existence, and I want credit for it." Then Brackus arrived, 6-limbed. From Velg Prime, which is the part of the Velgari homeworld that the rest of the Velgari consider, I am told, somewhat excessive. He was carrying 3 weapons he was not supposed to have yet, and when I pointed this out, he looked at me with 4 eyes and the absolute conviction of a being who had never been told no and survived to process the experience. I confiscated 2 of the weapons. We negotiated on the 3rd, and then Dario walked in. He had changed his shirt. This is the detail I remember most clearly. He had changed his shirt, and the new one had text on it, in a human script, and when I later had it translated, it said, "I survived Monday. Everything else is fine." He looked around the room, at the Velgari, who had paused their territorial circuit to stare at him, at Zorva, whose threat markings were pulsing in what I recognized as profound confusion, at Brackus, who had gone very still in the way large predators go still when they have spotted something and are waiting to determine whether it is prey or not. Dario looked at all of them, and he clapped. Not aggressively, not as a challenge, just clapping. A slow, rhythmic, appreciative clapping, the way I would later learn humans do when they approve of something. The room went silent. I want you to understand what clapping sounds like when you have never heard it before. It is a sharp, hollow, repetitive impact noise. It has no obvious biological source. It serves no apparent function. It is the kind of sound that, to an instinct-driven predator brain, registers in the exact same category as unknown danger, because known dangers have known sounds. Unknown sounds, by definition, require caution. Brackus took 2 involuntary steps backward. I wrote in my log that evening, "Human recruit performed unknown threat display upon arrival. No casualties. Recommend monitoring." Then Dario introduced himself to Brackus, personally, with his hand extended in what I now know is a human contact greeting. Brackus looked at the hand. He looked at Dario. He looked at the hand again. Dario reached into his bag and produced a small, wrapped object. He held it out. "Granola bar," he said. "Oat and honey. Sorry, I don't know if you can eat it," but it seemed rude not to offer. Brackus did not take the granola bar, but he also did not use any of his remaining weapons. Under the circumstances, I counted this as progress. The Hollow Maze is the first real test at Predator Academy. It is not designed to be passed. Let me be very clear about that. It is designed to show us who a recruit is when they believe they are going to die. Every response is acceptable. Fight, run, freeze, climb, even crying, though we do not put that in the official documentation. What we are watching for is the response itself, the raw, unfiltered instinct beneath all the training and posturing. We released the Shriek Beast into the maze first. 30 seconds head start, standard protocol. Then we sent Dario in. The control room observation deck looks down through reinforced viewports onto the maze below. Commander Talus had come down to watch, which was not standard. But word had spread. The human recruit. The small one. The one who clapped. There were, I noted with professional disapproval, 11 non-essential personnel on the observation deck. Dario entered the maze. We tracked him on sensors. He walked for approximately 90 seconds, taking corners at a moderate pace, looking at the walls with what the sensor analysis would later describe as low-level curiosity. Not alertness. Not fear, curiosity. Like he was walking through a building he hadn't been to before and was mildly interested in the layout. The Shriek Beast found him in Grid 7. The Shriek Beast is a Dravakian ambush predator. It does not have a face, technically. It has a sound-producing structure where a face might be, and when it opens that structure, the noise it produces bypasses rational thought entirely and goes directly to the part of the brain that handles survival. We have had recruits twice the physical mass of a Shriek Beast turn and run the moment they heard it. The shriek beast opened its sound structure at Dario Voss from a distance of approximately 4 body lengths. Dario stopped walking. He reached into his bag. He took out a small packet of what I would later learn were chips, a crispy human food product that makes its own small crackling noises when handled. He sat down on the floor of the maze, cross-legged, and he looked at the shriek beast. He did not blink. I want to be precise about this. The human eye blink rate, I learned afterward, is somewhere between 15 and 20 times per minute under normal circumstances. Dario Voss, sitting on the floor of the hollow maze, staring at a shriek beast, did not blink for an interval our sensors clocked at 2 minutes and 40 seconds. The shriek beast made its sound again. Dario kept staring. He ate a chip. The shriek beast made a different sound, smaller, uncertain. It backed away. On the observation deck, nobody spoke for a very long time. It was Commander Talus who finally said something. He leaned forward slightly, looking through the viewport, and said, "Did the human just stare a shriek beast?" "Yes," I said. "With snacks." "Yes?" Talus was quiet for another moment. "File a report," he said. "I want to know what we are dealing with." I filed 7 reports. None of them, in retrospect, were adequate. Outpost Dravak has a heating system that was installed approximately 50 years ago by a contractor who I am convinced had never experienced cold and was working entirely from theoretical understanding. It functions at roughly 60% capacity in good conditions. When an ice storm comes down from the northern ridgeline, which it did on day 9 of the training cycle, it functions at something closer to 20% capacity, which means the barracks block gets cold enough that even the Velgari recruits, who come from a planet where the average temperature is 15 degrees above freezing, start looking uncomfortable. I allocated additional thermal units, standard procedure, but the eastern barracks block, where Dario had been assigned alongside Brakus, Zorva, and Meth, had a power coupling that had been flagged for maintenance for, I am ashamed to say, approximately 3 years. The thermal units did not activate. Meth, I should explain, was a recruit from a species called the Sulvan. They were approximately 5 feet tall, entirely silent as a species, communicating through pressure signals and light variations in their skin. Meth communicated in subtle shifts of blue and gray, and their expressions, to any species that could not read Sulvan skin language, were completely unreadable. They had arrived at orientation, looked at everyone, and then simply stood near the wall for 40 minutes without moving. We were not entirely sure yet whether Meth was a tactical genius or deeply lost. The jury, as humans apparently say, was still out. So, Eastern Barracks Block, ice storm, no heat, 4 recruits. 3 of them began behavioral thermoregulation, which is a scientific way of saying they piled onto the bunks and tried to share body heat while maintaining the physical dignity appropriate to elite warrior candidates, which was working for nobody. Dario walked outside, into the ice storm, for 11 minutes. Then he came back inside, carrying a collection of materials, branches from the windbreak trees along the eastern perimeter, some structural mesh he had, I would later discover, borrowed from a storage panel, and a small object from his bag that produced, on contact with the mesh, a small controlled spark. He built a fire in the barracks. On the stone floor, in the cleared central area, where there was a ventilation shaft overhead, he built a fire using sticks and manual ignition, and sheer human confidence in the concept that fire was a reasonable solution to being cold. He sat down next to it. He started humming something, a low, tuneless, rhythmic sound that had no particular melody, but also no particular endpoint. Brakus moved first. He was trying to be subtle about it, which, for a 6-limbed Velg Prime native, looks like a large predator moving sideways toward warmth in very slow increments while maintaining eye contact with the wall. He ended up approximately 2 feet from the fire, facing away from it, which allowed him to pretend he had arrived there for unrelated reasons. Zorva sat down on the opposite side. She said nothing. Her threat markings faded to their resting color, which is a pale silver blue, and she pulled her knees up, and stared at the fire. Meth drifted over last and stood just within the fire's warmth radius, and their skin went a soft, steady amber color, which, I would later learn from a xenobiology consultant, is the solvent expression for something close to contentment. Dario looked at all of them. He nodded once. He kept humming. He did not comment on the fact that 3 apex predators from 3 separate warrior species had gathered around his fire like they had always intended to do exactly that. I was watching through the exterior sensors. I had been doing a routine check of the storm systems, and the feed had been open for the Eastern Bloc. I watched for quite a while. Then I closed the feed, sat back in my chair, and spent several minutes considering my retirement options. The colony on Drevok's southern continent was supposed to be very peaceful, warm, good soil for growing things. I did not retire. But I thought about it seriously. By week 3, I had stopped expecting the situation to normalize. This was healthy, I think. Acceptance is the final stage of something, and I had moved through denial, confusion, professional alarm, and existential renegotiation in rapid succession. Acceptance was almost comfortable. The dynamic in the Eastern Barracks block had become, to use a term with absolutely no military basis, a unit. Not because anyone had assigned it, not because a ranking structure had been established, but because Dario Voss existed in a space with 3 other recruits and was so completely, bafflingly unbothered by everything around him that the other 3 had started using his calm as a reference point. Zorva had begun asking him questions. This was remarkable. Zorva was a 3rd-generation warrior from a Cathari military family. She had trained since age 4. She did not ask questions of beings she considered lesser, and by every objective biological metric, Dario Voss was lesser. And yet, she would sit across from him at mealtimes and ask things: what do humans do with fear? Why do humans make noise when they are happy? What is the purpose of the paper thing he kept writing in? Dario answered everything, easily, without condescension and without performing. He just answered. He told her fear was useful, but not the boss of you. He told her humans made noise because feeling something alone was harder than feeling it out loud. He showed her the paper thing, the journal, and explained that sometimes writing things down made them smaller. Zorva did not respond to any of this, but her threat markings, which I had come to read with some proficiency, stayed resting silver for most of these conversations. For Zorva, that was the equivalent of leaning in. Brackus had stopped sleeping with his claws extended. This is significant. Velg prime predators sleep in full threat posture. It is biological. It is not a choice. And yet on day 19, I checked the sensor log from the Eastern Bloc, and Brackus was sleeping on his back with 4 of his 6 limbs in a loose, uncurled position. The sensor flagged it as a possible medical event. I overrode the flag. I knew what it was. He felt safe. A 6-limbed apex predator from the most hostile terrain in Velgari space felt safe enough to uncurl because there was a human in the room. I brought this to Commander Taelis. Taelis is 212 years old. He is Drevakian, old bloodline, and he has the particular quality of extreme age that very old beings develop, which is that almost nothing surprises them and almost everything interests them. He listened to my report with full attention, the way he always did, and when I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Is the human aware, Taelis said, that he is supposed to be afraid? I don't think so, I said. Has anyone told him? No. Why not? I thought about this. I think, I said slowly, that we were all waiting for him to figure it out on his own. Taelis nodded, very slightly. And has he? No, I said. He seems to be having a fine time. Taelis turned to look out the window of his office, at the training grounds below, and he said nothing for a long moment. Then, keep watching, Vorak. I want to know what a human does when it is finally pushed. And if it breaks? I asked. Taelis looked at me. There was something in his expression I had never seen there before. Not quite concern, not quite fascination, something in between. I'm beginning to think, he said, that it won't. The Shatterpoint simulation is classified. I am going to describe it anyway because the results were, frankly, too remarkable to omit. And because the classification status of the simulation itself is somewhat undermined by the fact that what Dario Voss did inside it will be discussed in military psychology papers for the next 100 years. The simulation runs for 6 hours. It does the following things, in sequence. It removes all light. It generates audio of the recruit's squad mates dying, using voice synthesis calibrated to each individual. It introduces a temperature drop designed to simulate exposure. It runs a 30-minute phase we internally call the despair cycle, which uses specific frequency combinations to trigger neurochemical responses associated with hopelessness. Then it ends. Every recruit who has been through the Shatterpoint simulation has a measurable response to some part of it. The metrics are not about pass or fail. They are about which part breaks through and how deep it goes, and what the recruit does next. This is the data we need. This is what tells us what a warrior's weak point is, so we can train around it. Dario went in at 0700. We watched his biometrics on the monitoring board. Heart rate, steady. Neural activity, nominal. Stress hormone levels, baseline. The lights went out. His heart rate went up 2 points, then came back down. The audio started. The synthesized sounds of Bracus, Zorva, meth, all designed to simulate distress and death. His heart rate went up 4 points. Then it came back down. The despair cycle started. We watched the neural activity monitors. There is a specific pattern that the despair cycle produces in every species we have tested. A recognizable cascade of activity in the fear processing and hope regulation centers. In some species it is fast. In others, it is slower. But the pattern comes. In Dario Voss, during the despair cycle, the neural activity monitors showed something our lead simulation technician initially logged as a sensor error. Boredom. Not suppressed fear. Not endured distress. The specific, measurable neural signature of a being that is understimulated and waiting for something more interesting to happen. At hour 5, we detected him moving around in the dark. He had taken off one of his boots and was tapping it against the floor in a rhythm. Just to make noise, we assumed. Just to have something to do. The simulation ended at hour 6. The lights came back. Dario stood up, stretched with his arms over his head, in that particular human full-body elongation that looked, to untrained alien eyes, like a threat display, and said, to nobody in particular, that was like a Tuesday. Then he put his boot back on and walked out. I pulled his biometric log and read it 3 times. Then I called the simulation technician. Run a calibration check, I said. I already did, she said. Twice. And? The equipment is functioning perfectly, she said. Instructor Vorak, I have been running this simulation for 19 years. Yes, I said, and I would very much like to go home now and have a drink. That makes 2 of us, I said. I put the biometric log in Dario's file and sat with it for a while. 6 hours in complete sensory distress, and his lowest recorded moment was mild impatience. I thought about humanity. About what kind of history produces a being whose baseline response to manufactured despair is Tuesday. I did not sleep particularly well that night. Live combat exercise day arrived on schedule. It does not matter, in hindsight, that Dario was not supposed to be there. By week 4 of Predator Academy, administrative errors have a way of becoming irrelevant. The machine moves. The training happens. And in this case, the machine had produced something none of us had on record. The exercise parameters were as follows. 40 active combat drones, each armed with non-lethal suppression systems that would, upon contact, deliver a charge sufficient to incapacitate a Velgari adult for 30 minutes. The terrain was the Outer Range, which is 3 square kilometers of broken ground, partial cover, and sensor-reflective rock formations that made long-range tracking unreliable. The objective was simple: neutralize or evade all 40 drones. Recruits worked in their assigned squads. Dario's squad was Bracus, Zorva, Meth, and 2 Velgari recruits named Gorath and Feluk, who had not spoken to Dario directly since orientation, but had started sitting near him at mealtimes, which I noted as data. The squad went in. I want to be very clear. I have watched hundreds of live combat exercises. I know what a good tactical mind looks like in the field. I know the difference between instinctive aggression, which is common, trained response, which is better, and genuine strategic thinking, which is rare. What I watched in the next 2 hours did not fit cleanly into any of my existing categories. Dario did not have rank in this squad. He had not been given command. But within 4 minutes of entering the outer range, without raising his voice, and without giving any formal orders, he had the squad doing something that made no immediate tactical sense, but that my experience told me was going to work. He split them. Not to maximize coverage, which is standard, he split them in a pattern that looked, from the overhead sensor feed, almost random. And then, he started making noise. Not communication noise. Deliberate, intentional disruption. He picked up stones and threw them in directions the squad was not. He had Bracus activate his secondary biological scent gland on the western side, drawing sensor attention. He had Zorva's threat markings pulse in the open, visible from the drone sensors, a bright biological signal that said, "Here, I am here, come here," not realizing, or perhaps entirely realizing, that the drones would prioritize the most visually prominent threat signal. The drones clustered. Not all of them, but enough. And while they clustered on Zorva, who was moving laterally with the composed irritation of a being who had been used as bait and accepted this with professional grace, the rest of the squad moved through the gaps. Gorath went down in Sector 3. Drone ambush came from an angle that the sensor-reflective rock hid until it was too late. The squad kept moving. Dario did not stop. He adjusted the pattern, absorbed the loss, and kept going, because this is what you do. And somehow he knew that, this small human from Earth Colony 7, who had arrived on a civilian transit shuttle with a bag of snacks and a shirt with text on it. The moment that ended me professionally, the moment I think about most often, came in Sector 7. Zorva was pinned. A drone had her behind a rock outcrop, sensor locked, and every time she moved it fired suppression charges that kept her head down. She had approximately 90 seconds before it found an angle that worked. Dario walked toward the drone, not ran. Walked. No weapon drawn. Nothing in his hands. He walked toward a 40 drone-class suppression unit, with his hands visible and his pace completely steady, and his face doing absolutely nothing. He got within 4 body lengths of it. The drone tracked him, raised its charge array. And then Dario stepped to the side, reached out, and smacked the right side panel of the drone with the flat of his hand. Hard. Precisely. Once. The drone sensor array shorted. Not because one hit is normally enough to short a suppression drone sensor array, it is not. But Dario had watched the tech briefing. One briefing, 3 weeks ago. He had listened to 45 seconds of a hardware overview that mentioned the sensor integration coupling point on the right side panel. The one that the design team had flagged as a minor vulnerability, the one that had never been relevant because nobody was supposed to get close enough to a live drone to slap it. Zorva stood up from behind the rock. She looked at Dario. She looked at the drone, which was rotating in confused circles with a shorted sensor array. She looked at Dario again. "You hit it," she said. "Yeah," Dario said, "with your hand." The panel was the weak point, he said. Already moving, already looking at the next sector, already thinking 3 problems ahead. Zorva watched him for exactly 1 second. Then, she followed. They neutralized 31 of the 40 drones. The other 9 were logged as acceptable operational losses. For context, the previous squad record for this exercise was 22. Dario, upon exiting the outer range, asked if there was food. There was not. He produced a snack from his bag. He offered some to Bracus. This time, Bracus took it. On the observation deck, I stood at the sensor board for a while after the feed closed. I thought about what Talus had asked me weeks ago. What a human does when it is finally pushed. Now I knew. It does not break. It calculates. And then it slaps the problem until the problem stops working. Graduation at Predator Academy is a structured ceremony. There is a ranking. There are commendations. There is a formal address from the commander. It is dignified, and it is earned. And it is the moment we deliver to these recruits the confirmation that they have survived, something that was designed to be survived only by the best. Dario Vos graduated top of his cohort. I want to pause on that. Not because it surprises you. By this point, if you have been paying attention, it does not surprise you either. But I want to pause on it because of what it means. Top of his cohort. Above Zorva, who was third-generation Cathari military. Above Bracus, who came from a planet that is objectively trying to kill everything on it at all times, and has produced nothing but warriors for 6,000 years. Above Goreth and Feluk, who were Velgari frontline grade. Top of his cohort. Because he was not afraid. Because his brain apparently files despair under boring. Because he learned a drone hardware vulnerability from a 45-second briefing and acted on it 3 weeks later in live combat, without hesitation. Because he made friends with apex predators by offering them food and sitting near fire and answering their questions without condescension. I submitted my official report to the Galactic Military Council on the day after graduation. I will tell you how it began, because I wrote it 7 times before I was satisfied with the opening line, and I think it is important. It began. We made an administrative error. The human should have been sent to a civilian registration desk. He was not. This is what happened. The report ran 43 pages. It covered Dario's biometrics across every test, every simulation, every live exercise. It covered the behavioral shifts in his squadmates, the Bracus sleep posture data, the Zorva threat marking logs, the meth skin color records, all of which showed, in measurable biological terms, that 3 of the most instinct-driven predator species in the coalition had felt safe, because a human was nearby. The report covered the Shatterpoint simulation results, which the Council's psychological division would, I later learned, classify and study for a decade. And it ended with a recommendation. Not, as many people assumed it would, a recommendation to prohibit humans from predator-grade military programs. The case for that was obvious, and I considered it for approximately 3 minutes before discarding it. The data did not support exclusion. The data supported something more complicated and considerably more alarming. The recommendation read, "Do not keep humans out of predator track programs. They will, in all probability, excel." However, under no circumstances, in no scenario, for no operational reason, should humans be permitted to lead or administrate such programs. Because within 3 weeks, without rank, without authority, without apparent effort or intent, Dario Vos became the organizational center of the most demanding combat training facility in the known galaxy. He did not mean to, he was simply present. This is the problem. Humans do not need to try to lead. They simply exist, unbothered and warm and full of snacks, until everyone around them has quietly decided that this is the person they would follow into the dark. This is not a trainable quality. This is not a tactical skill. This is something else entirely, and we do not have a word for it yet, but we should find one because we are going to need it. The Council read the report. They reclassified most of it. They opened a working group on human integration in coalition military structures that is, I am told, still ongoing. And Dario Vos was offered a placement in 3 different coalition special operations units within a week of graduation. He took the one that offered the best meal stipend. I cannot say I was surprised. The transport came at 0800 on a clear morning. No ice storm. The northern ridgeline was quiet. The training grounds were still. It was the kind of morning that Outpost Dravak occasionally produces when it wants you to think it is a reasonable place to spend time before it remembers itself and brings in a weather system from the eastern range. Dario came out of the eastern barracks block with his bag over one shoulder. Same bag he arrived with. He had added to it over the weeks. Small things. A stone from the outer range. A piece of mesh from the fire incident that someone had cleaned and folded. I suspected Zorva, though she would never confirm this. Bracus, Zorva, Meth, Goreth, and Feluk were at the gate. Not because anyone told them to be. They were just there. Standing in the particular loose formation that this squad had developed on their own, not shoulder to shoulder the way a formal rank would stand, but with the specific spacing of beings who have been through something together and know exactly where the others are, without needing to look. Dario stopped in front of them. He looked at each of them. Not quickly. He actually looked at each of them, the way he had done everything, with complete and unhurried attention, like there was nowhere else he needed to be, and nothing more important than this exact moment. He thanked me first. By name. "Vorak," he said, "you run a good program. I mean that." He put out his hand. I looked at it for a moment, then I took it. The human contact greeting, one firm up and down motion. He was warm. His grip was steady. He told Bracus he was glad they met. He called him Buddy. Bracus made a sound in his chest that was, I recognized, the Velg prime equivalent of being deeply moved, while refusing to show it. He put one large limb briefly on Dario's shoulder. A contact gesture. From Bracus, who, 3 weeks ago, had taken 2 involuntary steps backward at the sound of clapping. He told Zorva she would do great. He said it simply, without qualification. Zorva's threat markings went silver-blue and stayed there. She said nothing, but she held eye contact with him for a long moment, which, for a Cathari, is not nothing. It is, in fact, quite a lot. He gave Meth the last of his snack pack. The entire remaining contents, 4 separate items, pressed into Meth's hands without ceremony. Meth's skin went amber. Then a color I had never seen from them before, a deep, warm gold that the xenobiology consultant, when I described it later, said was the Sullivan expression for something that does not translate precisely but comes closest to, "I will remember this." He waved to Gorath and Felok, who waved back, which was not a gesture either of them had performed before in my observation, but which they produced now with the slightly uncertain quality of beings who have learned something new and are trying it for the first time. Then Dario Voss turned and walked to the transport. He did not look back. He got on the transport, stowed his bag, and sat down by the window. The transport lifted. I watched it clear the perimeter, angle north, catch the upper current, and become a point of light. And then, not even that. Silence. It lasted for a considerable time. Bracus broke it, very quietly, without looking at anyone. He said, "I never want to see another human again." He did not say it with hostility. He said it the way a being says something when they are trying to protect themselves from a feeling they do not have adequate language for. Zorva said nothing. Her threat markings pulsed once, a single slow wave of silver blue, and then steadied. She turned and walked back toward the barracks. Her posture was precise. Her spine was straight. She did not look at the sky. Meth stood still for a long time, their skin cycling slowly through amber and then cooling toward gray. Then they turned and went inside. Gorath and Felok left together, talking in low Velgari rumbles that I did not try to translate. I stood at the gate, alone. I am not a being given to sentiment. 41 years in this work does not leave much room for it. I have said goodbye to hundreds of recruits. I have watched good warriors leave this outpost and go on to remarkable careers, and I have felt the appropriate professional satisfaction of a job completed correctly. This was different. I knew it was different. I did not examine the difference too closely because I was at the gate in my uniform, and it was 0830, and I had a full training day ahead of me, and I am Vorak, Senior Combat Instructor, Predator Academy, Outpost Drevik, and I do not stand at gates feeling things. I walked back to my office. I sat at my desk. I opened the report file. The full version, the unclassified draft, the one that still had my working notes at the top. I scrolled to the first page. I typed 3 words above the opening line. Not as a formal header, not as a section title, just 3 words, because they were the truest thing I had written in 41 years, and they deserved to be first. We were warned. Then I closed the file, straightened my papers, and went to face the next training cycle. The morning was quiet. The ridgeline was still. Somewhere in the northern current, a transport was carrying a human in a shirt with text on it toward whatever came next. I did not envy them. Whatever came next, I mean, not the human. The human, I suspected, was going to be absolutely fine.